Welcome to this session on risk management for animal health. I've just prepared a little introductory video to set the scene and to point out what it is that I am wanting you to do during this workshop. So deer are naturally healthy animals that don't suffer from very many diseases and don't need very many animal health treatments, or so we're told. And it is largely true, and we're lucky that deer don't suffer from a lot of those annoying diseases that sheep and cattle get, like bloat and metabolic diseases and fly strike, to name a few. However, there are a few things that they can suffer from, and sometimes these can end up being fairly devastating. So we're not going to run through each disease individually, and we're certainly not developing a drenching plan during this session. But what we're going to do is look at general deer health and how to maintain our deer as healthy as possible so that we don't have to intervene as much anyway, but also so that the animals thrive, perform well, reproduce well, and grow well. So healthy deer are bright, alert, they have shiny coats, they move freely, they interact socially with other animals, don't get beaten up. And they're also relaxed enough that they will graze in the presence of people and spend the right amount of time lying down, the right amount of time playing, the right amount of time eating. Now, to put things into perspective, all of us, you, me, and all of our animals live in a sea of bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, nematodes. We're just wading our lives through all of these organisms, billions upon billions of them, inside our bodies, outside our bodies, and in our environment. And most of us get by perfectly well without any need for any types of treatments whatsoever. The same is true for our animals. And why is this? This is because a lot of these organisms are not harmful. Some of them are helpful. They form part of the normal biota of the animal and actually help them to defend them against other organisms. And some of them, the animals develop an immunity to, so that they don't actually cause disease. So we're going to have a look at that, how our animals develop immunity and remain healthy in the face of all these pathogens. And occasionally, an animal won't. So here we can see a group of healthy looking deer, nice shiny coats, well conditioned, bright and alert, and one that's not, presumably treated the same as all the others in the mob, but something's not functioning right inside this one. So we'll start with this concept of immunity. This starts out as a passive immunity handed to the newborn animal through the colostrum from the dam. Those of you who rear calves and lambs will know all too well just how important this good quality and quantity of colostrum early in life is, and how animals that don't get enough colostrum very often end up being poor doers. However, over a period of a few months, all those antibodies are broken down and removed from the body, and the animal then has to develop its own immunity, which is an acquired or active immunity. This is developed through exposure, either to disease organisms or to vaccination. We can also have a look at the immune system in two components, a non-specific component, which is basically just a first line of defense or a shield, and things like the skin and what's on the surface of the skin and the ability to form scabs in response to injury, and also the integrity of the gut lining are part of our non-specific immunity. So they're not attacking any particular organism, just trying to prevent anything that could potentially be harmful. And then we have a specific immunity, and this is more an internally directed immunity related to white blood cells and their ability to produce antibodies in response to specific disease organisms. Now, on top of this, we have a concept called resilience. Now, resilience isn't the same as immunity. Resilience is the ability of an animal to maintain outwardly at least looking healthy and growing and reproducing, even when it's exposed to disease organisms that might cause problems in other animals. Now, one important concept in the development of immunity and the ability to remain resilient is pathogen loading. How much organism is the animal exposed to? So depending on the pathogen, if we have a small loading going into the animal, attacking the immune system, or into our resilient animal, then that animal is likely going to be able to fend off that loading without too much problem, and the immune system can respond to that small challenge with a bigger response and protect the animal from disease. If, however, our loading is very large, so there's lots and lots of disease organisms in the environment that the animal is exposed to, then that can overwhelm the immune system and cause our animal to not be able to maintain its resiliency in the face of that big challenge. So that's one important concept. Another aspect of all this is virulence. Now, this means how serious is this disease-causing agent? Is it something that's likely to get in there and really quickly kill the animal? Or is it something that's going to make the animal a bit sick, but is more than likely going to recover at some point? Also in here, we've got the concept of what role genetics has to play. So if an animal has evolved in an environment where those potential disease organisms have been present, then they will have evolved to develop a good, strong immunity early in life. If they hadn't, then all those susceptible animals would have died out. So it only makes sense that an animal that has had those bugs around while it's been evolving is going to be more or less resistant to them. Now we're just going to have a bit more of a closer look at some of these concepts and add a few more. So when it comes to loading, some of the diseases that are particularly important in terms of their load, and particularly on resilience, are the toxins and especially things like facial eczema spores and ryegrass endophyte. But also pretty much all of the parasites. A small number of parasites, including ticks, is not an issue, but a large number can quickly overwhelm the system. And for some of our bacterial diseases as well, it's some of the ones that are in the environment all the time and don't generally cause a problem, when they becomes a very heavy contamination level, then they can be an issue. So to deal with this, we're looking at environmental contamination. How can you practically reduce the environmental contamination loading on your property? We have a look at virulence. Now these things we probably want to keep to an absolute minimum or prevent exposure to it all. And some of these are exotic or notifiable diseases, and some of them are just particularly nasty pathogens. So we're not going to eliminate fuso, that's probably around, but we can try and reduce the chances of it getting into the animal. And some of these, like TB, we can try and reduce the chance of them getting onto the farm. And some of these we can actually vaccinate against as well. So here we're looking at managing biosecurity and also thinking about vaccination. Now, if we have a closer look at genetics, there are a few diseases that we know that there's a genetic variation amongst deer in their ability to mount immune response to the disease, and some interesting work with Johne's disease and more recently with Kala. So MCF, we know that Davids are particularly susceptible to this virus, and it's much less common these days than what it used to be. There's more than likely a genetic component to facial eczema, Johne's disease, and as I mentioned, with the recent work with Kala, to parasites, and probably a whole range of others as well. And interestingly, clostridial disease is not very common at all in deer, and the majority of deer probably aren't vaccinated against clostridial disease, but we don't see cases of tetanus and malignant edema and pulpy kidney in our deer. Now, there are two other very important concepts which you'll notice are not on here. One of those is nutrition. And this is really absolutely critical to developing and maintaining an active immune system. So starting right from probably when the baby is still inside its mum, but we can manage by making sure the dams are in good condition of fawning, making sure they've got good colostrum. Has the animal got enough energy in its diet, enough protein? Has it got all the macro and micro minerals and trace elements that it needs? And thinking about antibiotics, we don't use a lot of antibiotics in deer, but they can mess up with the normal gut flora, kill off the good bugs and make the animal more susceptible to infection with bad bugs. Anything that disrupts the normal function of the gut. The other major factor is stress. So we know stress is going to rip holes in the immune response. You can have short-term stress, such as yarding for weighing or vaccinating, or you can have long-term stress, which is more sort of nutritional, long-term nutritional stress or environmental stress or weather or social stress. And some of the diseases that we know are quite likely to rear their heads under stress conditions, Yersiniosis, lungworm, Johne's disease, and plenty of others. In fact, we could possibly even assume that probably all diseases are more likely under stress. And this can be in all ages of animals. We do often see lungworm in adult hinds when they've been under prolonged stress conditions. So what we have is a number of manageable risks. We can manage animal nutrition, we can manage environmental contamination, we can manage stress, we can have a look at biosecurity and whether there's anything we can do around genetic selection. So in this exercise, you're going to break up into either 3 or 4 groups, and each group's going to look at one of these, either nutrition, environment, stress, biosecurity, genetics. And on your flip chart, you're going to make a list of all the risks associated with those topics. And then on the other side, a list of the mitigation options for each of those risks. The idea is that this is then turned into an action plan. So you take those mitigations and put them onto a calendar of actions to take to prevent the chances of animals having disease and help them to stay healthy.